So I unlocked an interesting achievement for my channel recently. Not too long ago, I did a video reacting to Universal's Epic Universe theme park, reacting as a fan of the classic Universal Studios monsters, and reacting to, particular, the Dark Universe land that's supposedly based on the classic monsters, but doesn't have the classic monsters in it. Classic monsters have been reimagined for modern audiences. And just expressing my disappointment with that as a fan of the classic monsters, wishing that I could have seen the classic monsters in this classic monster land, and ideally in slow moving atmospheric dark rides that mirror the tone and the atmosphere and the content of the classic movies that I love. And man, people could not handle that. The achievement I unlocked is that video became the most disliked video on my entire channel. About 33% approval rating. And the reactions to it sort of fall into three categories. The first is informing me that the classic monsters suck, and you suck for liking them, and that they needed to be updated for modern audiences because nobody knows who they are and they suck and whatever. Which is basically just proving me right. Like, yeah, the Dark Universe doesn't have the classic monsters in it. That's what I said. You're just affirming that and complaining that they had to change it because the classic monsters suck. The second is that slow movie dark rides suck. You can't make a proper horror ride that's not a thrill ride, because these spooky, atmospheric, slow moving dark rides suck, and nobody likes them. And they're kiddie rides, right? Thrill rides are for grown-ups. And then the third complaint, which is that I just hate fun and I don't like anything. Because I don't like that specific thing, therefore I must not like anything. So, okay, fine. Then, even though like 99% of my channel is me talking about things that I like, apparently I don't like anything. So fine, I'll stick to talking about what I like, which is what I consider to be still the greatest horror ride on the planet, which is Disney's Haunted Mansion. So how is it the greatest horror ride ever? Well, here's the thing. There's this very damaging idea out there. This has to do with the second complaint. There's this very damaging idea out there that theme parks are just amusement parks, dressed up amusement parks. It's the same thing. And that, the only value a ride has is how thrilling it is. If it's got that adrenaline rush, it's got to be a roller coaster, basically. It's got to be some kind of roller coaster. Or else it's lame and it's a kiddie ride. This is a very damaging idea, and we've seen how this idea has damaged the art of theme park design. Over the last 20 years, we've seen this degradation of theme parks to just thrill rides, sometimes barely decorated roller coasters, things like that, thrill rides. Or just slap a character on it, right? It's Elsa. I recognize Elsa. Clap, clap, clap. I clapped when I saw it. This very flat, superficial, shallow view that rides are just rides, and what all that matters is how thrilling it is. It's been incredibly damaging because theme parks are about the theme. It's in the name. Theme parks. They're about the theme. They're not about thrill rides per se. You can have thrill rides in a theme park, but they're not about thrill rides. They're about theme. They're about atmosphere. They're about immersion into a setting. To embrace you in and immerse you in this alternate world, whether that's like some tropical tiki island or the American Old West or Universal Harry Potter land, Wizarding World of Harry Potter, right? It's about immersion into this alternate world. And everything that this theme park does, its architecture, its design, its public spaces, its rides, everything should support that theme, that immersion into this alternate world. And so by rights, a good horror ride, like by necessity, should almost be a slow moving dark ride, right? Because it's about the atmosphere. A horror thrill ride, a horror roller coaster, is equivalent to what passes for horror movies today, which is most often, an action movie with monsters instead of terrorists or criminals or whatever, right? Every time Universal tries to resurrect the monsters, it's always as an action movie. The Tom Cruise Mummy's an action movie. Dracula Untold's an action movie. Van Helsing is an action movie. They're all action movies, just with monsters instead of terrorists. Tom Cruise hunting a mummy instead. It's like the polar opposite of classic horror movies, which are about their spooky atmosphere, their chilling atmosphere, their unsettling atmosphere, their gothic atmosphere. In a theme park, you want atmosphere and setting. That's what it's about. And Disney has proven over and over again that this is what makes for great dark rides, great spooky rides, great horror rides. You can look at the Tower of Terror, which, yes, is a thrill ride, but the drop isn't even the best part. The best part is all the lead up to it, with the spooky old abandoned hotel, with the echoing big band music, and Rod Serling showing up on the TV to tell you you're the star of tonight's episode of The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone itself being, more of an atmospheric, unsettling, psychological horror show, not an action movie, things popping out at you. There's the opening acts of Pirates of the Caribbean, with the spooky skeletons and the midnight bayou and the caverns and all sort of stuff. In fact, now after all this vandalism with Jack Sparrow and the change in the auction scene, the spooky caverns and spooky bayou are like still the only good part of the ride left. It's a masterpiece of spooky atmosphere. But the piece de resistance, of course, is the Haunted Mansion. It's an absolute masterpiece, not only of like scary, spooky, dark rides, but just of theme park rides at all, of all themed design. Modern Imagineers should be studying the Haunted Mansion, not constantly trying to vandalize it. Understand how it works and why it works so well. The Haunted Mansion is not just the best horror ride in the world, it's arguably the best theme park ride in the world, period. It used to be kind of stiff neck and neck competition with Pirates of the Caribbean until they kept vandalizing Pirates of the Caribbean. Now the Haunted Mansion is kind of edged out. And I say that even with my favorite theme park rides being Tokyo Disney Sea's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth, both of which also in their own ways have horror and spooky elements to them. But I have a particular love for those because I love like Jules Verne stories, and I love Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I've done a video about it. I should be that corner, and everything. But if I'm going to say like best, then it's like from a technical standpoint, I would say Indiana Jones and Temple of the Forbidden Eye, which also very spooky, atmospheric ride. Fast paced, but it's still more about the atmosphere than the ride mechanics, which as proven by These of Dinosaur, which was the exact same ride system, exact same track, but not nearly as good a ride as Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye. Technically, I would say Temple of the Forbidden Eye, but from an all-around package of atmosphere and character and storytelling and everything, and the cohesion of the theme with the ride system, even I would say Haunted Mansion, by far the best theme park ride in the world. In its sort of composite form, if you count for all the different versions of it around the world. So what makes it so great? First of all, you have the like quintessential horror setting. It's the old dark house. It's the haunted house. Universal even made a movie, The Old Dark House, in 1932. In fact, the Haunted Mansion originally was going to have the classic monsters in it. It was going to have like Frankenstein and Dracula and all those sorts of things. Until Disney decided that they weren't going to rely on sort of the cinematic cliches, which by that point in the 1960s they were. They're not going to rely on those old horror movie cliches. They were going to do something original. They're going to take the pieces of classic horror and make something new with it, make something original with it. So you have that quintessential setting, But what makes it truly brilliant is the narrative logic of the ride. The Haunted Mansion is not a ride where you sit in a cart to watch someone else's story. Right? All great theme park attractions make the guest the center of the story. It's your story. Right? The pirates are attacking you. You are flying over Neverland. You are careening through an ancient temple. You are the star of tonight's episode of The Twilight Zone. The weaker dark rides are the ones that are just a synopsis of the movie, and you just kind of sit in a cart and you're just like watching what happens to Snow White, watching what happens to the Little Mermaid. You're watching someone else's adventure. It's a much better ride when it's your adventure that you're having. The Haunted Mansion is that kind of a ride. It even explains why this ride is full of tourists, is that you are visitors to the Haunted Mansion and you're taking a tour with the ghost host. And as you move through the building, you move through the house, the haunted house, the Haunted Mansion. The story deepens and unfolds. So it doesn't follow like a cinematic logic, right? Like, here are events from The Little Mermaid. Here are events from Snow White. Here are events from Alice in Wonderland. It is a geographic logic. You're moving through hallways. You're entering the ballroom. You're moving through the house. And as you're moving through the house, the story opens up to you. That is absolutely brilliant. It's hard to even exclaim, because you kind of like take it for granted. And if you don't think about theme design, like really in depth, you're just like, okay, whatever. No, that's actually brilliant, because that's what a theme park is, right? You're moving through a geographic space. If you wanted to watch the movie, you can watch the movie at home, right? I don't need to see a synopsis of the movie as a theme park ride, because I can watch the movie at home. In a physical space, I want to move through that physical space. I want to be in, Snow White's castle and the dwarf's mine and the scary forest. I want to be under the sea with the Little Mermaid. I want to be in the Haunted Mansion. And when you're moving through a space, then the story should unfold with a geographic logic as opposed a spatial logic rather than like a cinematic logic, if that makes sense. The Haunted Mansion operates by a geographic logic, a spatial logic. You're moving through the house. Absolutely brilliant. It's hard to even, again, explain why that is so brilliant. Because it understands that theme parks are spaces and not just a flat watching a thing happen. And that immerses you in it, right? Because you're in the physical space, and it moves with the logic of the physical space. So that immerses you, as opposed to sitting in a cart and watching something in front of you. You're not really immersed in that. You're a spectator to that. Okay. Now, in the Haunted Mansion, how that translates is that as you move through the house, the ghosts reveal themselves to you more and more and more. So you go towards the Haunted Mansion from the outside, whether that's Disneyland version, where it's this beautiful old plantation manor, or whether that's sort of the Tokyo and the Florida versions, where it's sort of that Hudson River architecture. You enter the spooky old house. And you start, and you're just in this lobby. You see the cobwebs, but it's not too scary yet. Then the voice of the ghost host is swirling around you, right? There's this presence there inviting you into this house. You go into the stretching room, and that's where you get your first experience of the uncanny, right? This haunted room is actually stretching. These paintings reveal themselves to you, and it sets the tone for the ride, right? You're expecting something that's humorous but macabre, right? These proper looking paintings reveal themselves to be these humorous but also terrifying vignettes of death, like impending death, right? One guy standing on a dynamite keg, another lady on the grave of her husband that she clearly killed, those sorts of things, right? But there's no ghosts yet other than the presence of the ghost host. And then flash, lightning, lights go out, there's a corpse up in the rafters, which I hope Disney's not going to take that out. Please, Disney, do not be cowards. Do not take that out. Right? That is such a key point of the story. because that's us meeting the ghost host. That's the ghost host up there when he offed himself because he couldn't escape from the room. That has that threat, right? It's not a thrill ride, but it is a threat. You need that aspect of threat. So it's a threat that we can't get out of this room, and our only way out is going to be like the ghost host um, by a self deletion, and that's also us crossing the threshold, right? When we encounter that corpse, that is us crossing the threshold from the living to the dead. That's that liminal space. And physically, right? The stretching room gets you down and gets you out into the doom buggy loading area. But that's our liminal space. We've crossed that threshold from life to death now. You go through the corridor of portraits there, thinking mainly the Disneyland version. You go through the corridor. Again, more uncanniness, right? Those things are changing. The portraits are the busts are following you. That uncanny. The presence of ghosts is making themselves more known because you cross that threshold from life to death. Now, you load into your doom buggy, and off you go. And you start going into the mansion. Now, the ghosts are making their presence much more obvious, but you don't see them yet. Right? You just see their effects. You see, and frankly, a genuinely frightening scene of this corpse trying to get out of the casket and pleading like, "Let me out, let me out." That's actually really horrifying. um, you've got these things behind the doors that are pulsing and trying to break the doors and trying to get at you in there. That's genuinely scary stuff. And I'm an old goth. I grew up liking superheroes and horror movies and stuff like that. And then I got into I was a goth in my late teenage years and my 20s and 30s. And so I've never been scared by horror stuff. Um, but my wife sure is. And she's my barometer for okay, what's a normal person's reaction to stuff? And she's genuinely scared of the Haunted Mansion. When she came out the first time I took her on it, she was just like, "Oh no, I don't even want to do that again, Corey." And it's like, "You were scared. Tell me more about it." I want taking down notes. What's it like to be scared by the Haunted Mansion? And yeah, that corridor of doors is actually scary if you're not accustomed to it. Um, these things all clawing, trying to get at you. Then you go into the seance circle and you see your first ghost, right? You see Madame Leota, and she's doing two things in the seance circle here. For one, she's calling forth the ghosts, right? It's your sympathetic vibrations. She's summoning the ghosts. This is a seance. She's summoning the ghosts so they can appear to you when they receive your sympathetic vibrations. The second thing, which is really interesting, is that she sets up the idea that being in the Haunted Mansion is actually a curse as well. Right? You get a sense of that with the ghost host. Right? He got trapped in the room and his only way out was doing what he did. But now you have Madame Leota, and she's this ghost head trapped in a crystal ball. She's trapped in this mansion. This mansion, for as happy as the haunts are, this mansion is a curse in its own way. But it's not all that bad. We'll talk about that in a bit. So now the ghosts have been summoned. Right? We've gone through the seance. The ghosts have been summoned. They respond to your sympathetic vibrations, and now you go to the ballroom. You go to the swinging wake. And it's incredible. It just opens up before you this massive, massive room filled with all of these ghosts. And unfortunately, if you're cursed to know how it works, kind of diminishes a little bit. But not even at the moment, you can get into the effect, and it's just absolutely spectacular. And it's such a beautiful analog effect as well. It works so perfectly. This massive ballroom, this massive spooky atmospheric ballroom filled with all of these ghosts doing all these things. But they're not trying to scare you anymore, right? You have expressed sympathy with them, your sympathetic vibrations. Now you're in sympathy with them, and you're joining in on the fun, which is the wild thing. Um, Disneyland. There's this fantastic book that I used multiple times in my undergraduate degree, writing essays about Disney and theme park design. Um, Disneyland: The Architecture of Reassurance. Disneyland is designed to be reassuring, um, which is also part of why people are so dissatisfied with Disney lately. Is that Disney not has ceased being reassuring and has become like a hectoring lecturer, right? About everything you like is bad. Um, but Disneyland, prior to the current fads, um, this architecture of reassurance, right? It's um, this reassurance of the good old days, Main Street USA, right? This reassurance of America's sort of the heroic narrative of America's past, Frontierland, the utopian vision of America's and the world's future in Tomorrowland, right? The reassurance of the validity of childhood fantasy in Fantasyland, and the reassurance of the world's sort of beauty and adventure in Adventureland. So the Haunted Mansion, you had the scary stuff in the corridor of doors, but now you've expressed a sympathy with it, and now it's not scary anymore. Like it's still ghosts, and it's still atmospheric, and it's still wonderful and beautiful, sublime in that respect. But it's not. These things aren't trying to kill you anymore, right? It's a kinship with them. Disney just made death reassuring. Right? Death can be fun, right? The afterlife is fun. Even if you're cursed as one of the 999 haunts of this house, they're still happy haunts. Um, yeah, some of them are reliving the circumstances of their death, like the duelists and the portraits, that sort of thing. But they're having a swinging wake. They're having a good time. Um, Death, it softens the horror of it and makes it reassuring. Death is fun. Thanks, Disney. Of course, now you might critique like, well, now it's not a horror ride anymore, right? It's a fun, happy ride. Except here's the thing: like this is a long-standing tradition in horror film, right? The horror comedy, right? Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, The Addams Family, Arsenic and Old Lace, Count Chocula, the Frankenberry Booberry, the monster cereals, right? Famous monsters of film, and the horror hosts, right? The horror hosts were there in some ways to soften the horror with humor and delight and familiarity. This is why generations of people fell in love with these movies and with these characters. With the real Frankenstein monster, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, King Kong, all of these characters, because they were familiar and in a sense friendly through this sort of culture that balanced them with more of a humorous aspect. The Haunted Mansion fits perfectly into that whole milieu of balancing that horror with that humor to make it something sort of safe and delightful. Um, the purpose of horror film in general is to provide you with that safe distance to work through those feelings so that when you confront the real horrors of real life, you're sort of spiritually and philosophically and metaphysically fortified to face the challenges of real life, the horrors of real life, through your encounter with these themes and ideas and characters and stuff in the movies. Haunted Mansion does that. And it fits perfectly into that whole thing. And then just as you think you're feeling safe about it, you go into the attic scene. And the attic has been changing over time. Originally, it was this purely spooky forlorn bride, and then it was Constance for a while, the Black Widow bride, and now it's perverted back to this the somber, mournful widow bride ghost. I actually liked Constance. People accuse me of hating everything new and not liking fun, and you just hate change because it's change. You just hate change for the sake of change, blah blah blah. No, I liked Constance. I thought Constance was great. I thought she was a fantastic addition to the Haunted Mansion because because she's my go-to example of a change that I liked. Because I felt that tonally and technologically and aesthetically, she was completely consistent with the rest of the ride. So it's not like throwing in Jack Sparrow, where it's obviously him, and throwing in the soundtrack from the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, even though the rest of the ride sounds like it was the theme songs from the '60s. Now it's the theme song of some full orchestral score of the song from the movie, or throwing in a projection of Davy Jones the Squid Monster in a ride with no other projections and no other squid monsters. The Haunted Mansion, the Constance, we've already seen changing portraits at this point. We've already seen ghosts. We've already seen projections by this point. She's just an improvement in all of those technologies. And, yeah, she has this black humor about chopping off the heads of her husbands. That's what the Haunted Mansion does. The Haunted Mansion is like all black humor about death. Death is fun. Death is reassuring. The afterlife is fun. You know, it's all this black humor about that. So I thought Constance was great. I thought she was a great addition to the Haunted Mansion, and I mean, I just like the black humor of the Black Widow Bride. Um, so it is a shame in that respect that they took her out. Now, as people are of all the things in the Haunted Mansion, they choose to be sensitive about that. Um, if we're going to be sensitive about any black humor about death, then you might as well just close the mansion altogether. That's what it's about. But they took Constance out and they've put in a new version of the forlorn, somber, mournful widow bride, which is fine, um, because that's the original character. It just after Constance, it just feels like less, right? Because the whole attic scene was like you see these portraits of the guys with their heads disappearing, and it leads up to that the punchline of Constance herself. Now it just kind of feels like less, like it's just sort of stuff until you get to the bride. And then after that, they've finally thrown the Hatbox Ghost in there as well. And I like them as characters, but I also think that how they did them is a little too digital looking. Like the you can kind of, if you don't know how, you can be like, how did they do the ghosts in the ballroom? That can still be mysterious, whereas the Hatbox Ghost is obviously digital. I'm not as big a fan of that, but I still love the character. The character is still great. All of these fantastic, great character designs, all by Mark Davis, which is why none of them are safe. Um, but you go through this attic scene, which now is once more like purely spooky. Right? It's purely a horror atmosphere of this somber, mournful, gothic atmosphere. You go through that now, just to remind you, it's still scary. We're still talking about ghosts here. We're still talking about death. It might be fun. It might be a swinging wake. Death might be reassuring. Death might be fun. The afterlife might be fun. But just remember, we're still balancing these two dynamics of the humor and the horror. Right now, from the attic, you fall backwards into the graveyard. We know from the story version, the official story version in the record, that yeah, you fall out of a window into the graveyard. Although sort of the urban legend is all about like, no, you die, you got killed by the bride or something, and now you're going to the cemetery. Um, you go into the cemetery, and again, it's just this amazing amazing spectacle of all of these ghosts all partying, having their swinging wake. And again, it's balancing that humor and horror, right? It's fun. Death is fun. Death is reassuring. The afterlife is fun. But they're all still ghosts, right? You remember that. And there's those vignettes like the prisoner and the executioner. Um the the arm that's like uh bricking itself into a tomb because it doesn't like all the noise. Yeah, it's still kind of horrifying in its own way, right? You have all these things. So again, it's still balancing all that, but it's still just this incredible spectacle. And you're moving through it slowly, just like all the other parts of the mansion. As you're moving through it slowly, you get a chance to appreciate what's going on around you, and to be immersed in this atmosphere of the spooky old house, and to actually look at and enjoy all of these scenes. And um, that's what makes it so rewritable as well, is that every time you go through it, you looking at different things, you're noticing different things you didn't see before. The first time you might only notice the stuff in the foreground. Next few times, stuff in the background. You might pick out a certain vignette and concentrate on that. You have that time to immerse yourself in this setting and enjoy it, um, or be scared by it, like my wife. Um, you don't have that in a thrill ride, an arm throwing you around and stuff like that. Not there's much to take in. It's just stuff flying at you. Um, you leave the graveyard. There's the hitchhiking ghosts, the icons of the ride, right? I mean, the ride is so rich in wonderful characters, right? The ghost host to his extent, Madame Leota, the Hatbox Ghost, the bride, every single one of the ghosts in the ballroom, in the graveyard, they're all so wonderfully conceived. Just amazing characters all in their own right. Like, if you were a real hardcore mansion collector, you could get figures of every single ghost in there, and it would be worthwhile. They'd all be different. They'd all be interesting. They all have their stories to tell. But of course, the big iconic characters are the hitchhiking ghosts. And one of them is going to follow you home. And you go through that corridor of mirrors, which they've now replaced the ghosts with digital effects. Again, which is like a little too digital. Like, digital is demystified because it's so obvious. Same thing, like, you people can recognize AI, right? Because it's just so obvious. Um, but the point is, there's this threat, like, this ghost is going to follow you home. And then you get off the ride, and there's little Leota who's telling you inviting you, hurry back, and don't forget to bring your death certificate. So what's happening there is that, in one respect, you can never escape the ride, because one of those hitchhiking ghosts is following you home. They're coming home with you. They're going to haunt your house now. So you can't escape the haunted mansion. And now you're being invited back. The mansion is not just leaving with you, it's also pulling you back in and inviting you to stay permanently as well. Bring your death certificate. So the haunted mansion ride doesn't have an end, right? It follows you home. It invites you back. It's a circle. It's this whole circle, right? As soon as you get out, you get back in line and go ride it again, right? In fact, it's pretty much like the last hour of a trip I take to Disneyland is just me riding the mansion over and over again. Um, the ride doesn't have an ending. It has a big show-stopping number in it with the graveyard, but it doesn't actually end. It invites you back. The ride is a circle. Um, yeah, which is great. It's as opposed to, like, a rides with cinematic logic where it's like, okay, you reach the end. The bad guy has been defeated. The prince and the princess have kissed, and that's the end of the ride. Haunted Mansion doesn't end. It invites you back again. Just absolutely brilliant ride. Incomparable, right? The closest approximations are, of course, the other versions that Disney has made, right? The Phantom Manor in Paris, which takes the elements of the Haunted Mansion, but then throws in a more defined narrative of Melanie Ravenswood and the Phantom there. Um, to varying effect, right? It was built at the time where they started really emphasizing, like, oh no, everything has to have a story, has to have a cinematic story. So they tried to overwrite a cinematic story onto the Haunted Mansion itself. And then there's Mystic Manor in Hong Kong, which was a response to the fact that ancestor spirits in Chinese culture is like religion. So you don't mess with it. It'd be like doing a spooky dark ride about Jesus. Um, so they do this Mystic Manor, which is an entirely different ride. Like, you could take Mystic Manor and put it in like California Adventure, and it would register as a different ride than the Haunted Mansion. It's different enough. Um, you could put Mystic Manor in San Francisco or something like that. You could put Mystic Manor in Animal Kingdom. Why they haven't done that is baffling to me. You know, they put in Avatar, but they didn't think to put in like Mysterious Island or Mystic Manor. Just baffling. You could put Mystic Manor in Animal Kingdom, and you wouldn't register that that's the same ride as the Haunted Mansion in Magic Kingdom. Um, but it's the same sort of idea. It has that motivating logic of the monkey opens the box and releases all these spirits, and you know, not spirits as such, but the magical music box enchants the house, enchants all the artifacts in the house. Um, you know, beautiful ride on its own, um, but it draws from what was established with the Haunted Mansion. The only other like dark ride I consider even within the ballpark of the Haunted Mansion is the Danse Macabre at Efteling in the Netherlands. It's a very different ride. You sit in the circular room, you sit in these pews, and then this ghostly concert starts playing, and the pews start spinning around, and the floor levitates and goes angles and all sorts of stuff. But it's still, even that owes a lot to the Haunted Mansion, right? You have these animatronics with these blue ghosts playing these instruments. It recalls a lot of the imagery from the Haunted Mansion, how the Haunted Mansion depicts ghosts, how the Haunted Mansion, you know, the instruments in the seance room and that sort of thing, recalls a lot of that and applies some of the principles of having like, you know, these characters like the maestro, like the nameless thing, which is represented by a black cat in the Danse Macabre ride. All the great rides, dark rides, owe something to Haunted Mansion in that respect, or at least to Disney with, you know, Pirates of the Caribbean and Tower of Terror and even aspects of Indiana Jones and so on. Um, I still think no other dark ride, um, uh, other than, you know, those ones I mentioned, come close to the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion is just an absolute triumph of a spooky atmosphere and the appropriate like spatial narrative flow of a theme park ride. It is like nearly like the most perfect theme park ride. Still, I think the best haunted attraction, the best dark ride in the world.